Bahia Bakari came back to consciousness in the water with jet fuel in her mouth and nothing solid under her feet. A few moments earlier, she had been strapped into a seat beside her mother, waiting for Yemenia Flight 626 to finish its night approach into Moroni. Then the aircraft hit the Indian Ocean with its engines still roaring, and the cabin vanished around her. There was no aisle, no window, no hand reaching down to lift her out. There was only black water, wreckage, and a 12-year-old girl who could barely swim, trying to understand why she was alone. She had left France with her mother, Aziza, on June 29, 2009. They were traveling from Paris to the Comoros, where their family had roots. Bahia was going for a family wedding. They first flew from France to Yemen, then changed planes in Sana'a for the final leg toward Moroni, the capital of the Comoros. The second aircraft was an Airbus A310 operated by Yemenia. There were 153 people aboard, including passengers and crew. Bahia later remembered that the plane felt different from the first one. It was smaller. It smelled bad inside. There were flies. But the flight itself seemed normal, and a child beside her mother had no reason to think the final approach would become the edge between life and death. The aircraft descended toward Prince Said Ibrahim International Airport in the early hours of June 30th. It was dark over the water. Grande Comore lay ahead, close enough that the trip was almost finished. Then the flight became rough. Bahia felt turbulence. She looked around, but no one seemed alarmed enough for her to panic. Adults stayed seated. The crew did not announce that the plane was in danger. Bahia told herself it must be normal. The aircraft was not stable on approach. Investigators later found that the crew lost control during the maneuver toward Moroni. Warning systems sounded. The jet struck the Indian Ocean off the coast of Grande Comore. The impact tore it apart. Bahia did not remember the crash as a full scene. She later described a sudden shock through her body, then a blank space between sitting in the airplane and finding herself in the sea. She had no life jacket and injuries she did not yet understand. Around her, the ocean moved hard in the dark. At first, she believed she was the only person who had fallen out. In her shock, the thought made its own kind of sense. Maybe the others had continued on. Maybe the plane had landed somewhere, and only she had been thrown into the water. It was a child's mind trying to organize something too violent. Then she heard voices. Somewhere in the darkness, people were calling for help. Bahia could not see them. The sea rose and dropped around her, and the wreckage moved with it. She called out too, but there was no one close enough to reach. The voices came from different places, then became fewer. As the hours passed, the shouting faded into silence. Bahia found a piece of debris and held on. It was not a raft. It was only something from the broken aircraft, enough to keep her from going under if she stayed with it. She tried to climb onto larger wreckage, but she did not have the strength. She clung to what she could hold, with fuel in the water and waves lifting her away from everything she had known. She was 12 years old. She was injured. She had almost no swimming ability. She did not know where her mother was. She did not know how far she was from shore. She did not know whether rescuers were coming. The night was long enough for her body to begin shutting down. She drifted without food, without water, without dry clothing, and without any way to signal. The ocean was choppy. Every wave could roll her, pull wreckage from her hands, or push water into her mouth. She later said she fell asleep while still holding on to the debris. When daylight came, the water did not become safe. It only became visible. Bahia could see the coast in the distance, but distance meant nothing to a child in rough water with a broken body. She could not swim to it. She could not make boats see her by will alone. The island was there. She was still alone in the sea. On shore and on the water, rescue efforts had begun. The crash sent aircraft, boats, fishermen, soldiers, and civilians into a desperate search. Private and commercial vessels joined in. One of those vessels was the Sima Com 2, with crew members searching through rough seas and wreckage for any sign of life. They found bodies and debris first. That was what a crash into open water usually gave rescuers: metal, luggage, fragments, and silence. Hope thinned with every hour. Then someone saw movement near wreckage. Bahia was still alive. From the boat, Rescuers saw a small figure trying to stay with debris and heavy water. They threw a life preserver toward her, but the sea was too rough and she was too weak to catch it. A wave could have taken her under before anyone reached her. A sailor named Libuna Mataraf Soliman jumped into the water with a flotation device. He reached Bahia and helped secure her. The crew threw the lifebuoy again, and this time they pulled both of them toward the boat. Bahia had survived the crash, the night, the fuel, and the ocean long enough for human hands to grab her. Once aboard the Sima Com 2, she was wrapped in blankets and makeshift coverings. She was cold, bruised, and hurt. She had hypothermia, facial bruises, injuries to her elbow and foot, and a fractured collarbone. Other reports also described pelvic injuries and burns or wounds from the wreckage and fuel. She was alive, but her body had been through impact, salt water, and shock. The boat carried her back to Port Moroni, where medical workers took over. At first, Bahia still did not understand the full scale of what had happened. She had survived, but she did not know yet that everyone else aboard Yemenia Flight 626 was gone. She did not know her mother had died in the crash. That truth came later, in a hospital, when a psychologist told her she was the only survivor. The words changed the rescue into something heavier. Bahia had not simply been found. She had been found when 152 others had not. Her mother, who had boarded beside her, was among the dead. News of the child survivor moved quickly around the world. Reporters called her a miracle. Officials praised her courage. Her father, Bahia Bakari, waited in France with grief no parent could prepare for. His daughter was alive. His wife was not. Bahia was flown back to France on a French government aircraft and taken to a Paris hospital. Her injuries were treated while investigators searched the ocean for answers. Divers and ships looked for wreckage and flight recorders. Families of the dead demanded to know why the aircraft had crashed so close to its destination. The investigation later found that the Airbus had not suffered a mechanical failure that explained the crash. The final report blamed inappropriate crew actions during an unstabilized approach that led to a loss of control. The plane had been nearly at the end of the journey. Instead, it had gone into the water at night, and almost everyone inside had died. For Bahia, survival did not end when the boat pulled her from the sea. It continued through hospital rooms, grief, and the long work of living with a story the world wanted to retell. She had to recover from injuries while carrying the memory of the dark water and the voices that stopped. She had to grow up with people calling her the girl who survived, even though she had also been the girl who lost her mother. Years later in court, she described the taste of jet fuel, the water, the voices, the fear, and the thought of her mother helping her hold on. She said the hardest part was grieving the mother who had been so protective of her. Behind the headline was not just survival. It was a child who had gone to the Comoros for a family celebration and returned to France without the person who had sat beside her on the plane. Yemenia Flight 626 crashed into the Indian Ocean on June 30th, 2009, with 153 aboard. Bahia Bakari was 12 years old. She was thrown into the sea without a life jacket, held onto wreckage through the night, until rescuers found her in rough water off the Comoros. Of everyone on that aircraft, she was the only one who came back alive. Thank you for listening to Horrifying Survival Stories. Subscribe for more stories of those who faced the impossible and lived.